Good afternoon, Sacred Heart. Father Mike here for the next presentation of Chapter 4 of the book by Arthur C. Brooks, Love Your Enemies, How Decent People Can Save America from the Culture of Contempt. Chapter 4 is arguably kind of a linchpin chapter in which he makes an argument for common ground between what he would call the liberal wing of politics and the more conservative wing. And we had quite a robust discussion last night about that in our discussion last night after 6:30 Mass in the cafeteria. Next week we'll take up Chapter 5, which will be the peril and power of identity in politics. Should also be quite interesting how he puts it. Another commentator named David Brooks, no relation to this one, but a conservative who writes in the New York Times, wrote that morality, once revealed, inherited and shared, but now it's thought of as something that emerges in the privacy of the heart. And this chapter is called, How Can I Love My Enemies If They Are Immoral? If we share not a common morality. And David Brooks' comment on this is that in America, morality is shifting away from what used to be Bible-based, or at least American historical, Constitution-based morality, into something completely different, very subjective, and it's a generational divide. Arthur Brooks quotes a 28-year-old man who says, I don't really think about right and wrong that much. It just doesn't enter into my life. In the opening segment of a video I showed with Bishop Barron and Arthur Brooks on Barron's show, we noted how love, the definition of love itself, is often misunderstood and confused in the culture. For Aquinas and for Barron and for Orthodox Catholic theology, love is really willing the good of another as other for their flourishing and for their good. And so oftentimes love gets tangled up with just my subjective feelings. And Barron noted in a course he was teaching at Notre Dame University, a girl just questioned whether or not she'd ever loved. And she was of a younger generation because of that definition. All that being said, we move into Chapter 4 more significantly when Brooks takes up a book called The Happiness Hypothesis written by a man named Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T. And Haidt identifies at least 5 characteristics that he calls foundations of morality across cultures: fairness or justice, care for others or compassion, and then respect for authority, loyalty, and purity or sanctity. He added a 6th later on called liberty. But Brooks maintains that, as he understood these that Haidt put out there, the 2 common ones that liberals and conservatives share are justice or fairness and compassion, care for others. And they cite a bunch of research about how both liberals and conservatives, Republicans and Democrats, for example, agree that there ought to be some kind of a safety net for those who are disabled by life, who by no fault of their own are somehow unable to make a living, for example. Likewise with health care and housing. The why of that is clear. We need this to provide for people who can't take care of themselves. The what, the policy directives, is where politics comes into play. But on the other 3, interestingly, respect for authority, loyalty to one's group, and purity or sanctity, conservatives hold those foundations of morality pretty strongly, and liberals don't. So like an example would be the NFL players who refuse to pledge allegiance to the flag or stand even while the national anthem is being sung at NFL football games, most of them African American, who take a knee. Conservatives are outraged by that kind of behavior, and many of them quit watching NFL football, for example. Liberals tend not to be bothered by that so much as they consider what African Americans or others went through in the history of our nation. They don't feel as much loyalty to the nation as others do. Good question, but he just lays it out there like that and kind of leaves it what I would call untethered. And our group really got into discussing that very strongly last night. And we concluded that on certain issues, you can't just consign liberty, or rather purity, loyalty, and respect for authority into private morality like Brooks tries to do at one point. There's social dimensions to that. For example, the issue of abortion, the issue of gay marriage, the issue of hate speech. that kind of comes over into the public realm as well. And once it gets defined, there can be severe consequences for those who might go against it. One of our members of the group last night mentioned the Equality Act that's been passed by the House of Representatives. Catholics have a lot to be wary of in that particular act. We'll see if the Senate passes it or not, but that could have strong consequences in the workplace because it guarantees and insists that organizations must hire those who reassign their sex, for example, in gender identity issues. If that comes crashing into our church, we'd have a big conscience with that. So religious liberty, which is a public issue, can be at stake in some of these issues. As Brooks goes on to discuss morality and how we differ on that or how we find similar common ground, he cites an author named James Q. Wilson, who wrote a wonderful book called The Moral Sense in 1993, a classic text. And James Wilson is a noted political scientist, or was one, he died. But he maintains that human beings by nature and by birth come out of the womb already as intuitive moralists. We know the difference between right and wrong. Even in families that might be severely dysfunctional, we still have a sense of what's right and wrong, and that comes with our nature almost like in our genes. And human beings can notice that in even very young children who know what is fair and what is not fair. Arthur Brooks goes on to discuss redistributive fairness and also meritocratic fairness. Republicans would tend to say, well, if we're going to have a safety net, we have to try to have those who can work even a little bit work for some of those benefits. And Democrats tend to be not so much in that camp, but to give that away through the government. But all agree upon that safety net. Arthur Brooks ends up saying that really the areas where we can agree on are in compassion and fairness, and that's where, if we're truly American, we can make a big difference in our country for the future. As for sexual purity, respect for authority, tribal loyalty or national loyalty, those are more dicey for common ground. And as we saw from our discussion last night, and I urge you to, if you'd like a copy of an article that critiqued Brooks on that very concept by an author in First Things Magazine, I'd be happy to send it to you. But there's a weak linchpin there in Brooks's argument. That being said, he does walk his talk. He speaks on college campuses where he oftentimes gets very hostile audiences, rudeness, and other things when he addresses some of the issues that he brings up in this book as he tries to dialogue with the other side who disagree with him. So I respect him a lot for that, and I think that you will too if you read this book and understand who he is and what he's trying to do, trying to stay away from contempt and have Americans dialogue about common moral values. Another critique of Brooks that came up in that article I cited from First Things is that unless America has values that transcend just being an American or just being our nation for our nation's sake, we're going to probably not have a happy future. I'm not going to predict what it might be. I can get negative about that. But unless we have transnational goals of unity, of goodness, of beauty, of truth, we're going to struggle with what it means to be a nation and try to be really good with disagreeing with each other. So I continue to urge you to read the book. Come next week on Wednesday morning after Mass at 8 a.m. We have a smaller group there that we discuss the book, chapter 5 next week again. And then Wednesday night is more robust. We had about 20 or 25 people there last night. You're welcome to come to that night as well. Thank you for considering this read and our book club for this Lent. I wish you growth in Christ and happy reading. God bless you.